Emily's hands trembled as she scrubbed the pack hall floors, knowing that tonight she would be called before the Alpha King and judged unworthy of even the breath she took. The stone beneath her raw knees was older than memory, worn smooth by centuries of wolves who had knelt here for blessing, for judgment, for mercy. Emily would receive none of those things. The freezing water in her bucket had long since numbed her fingers, but she kept scrubbing, kept her head down, kept herself invisible as nobles arrived in waves of silk and ceremonial furs. Their voices echoed off the vaulted ceiling, sharp with excitement for the moonrise ceremony, the sacred night when young wolves presented themselves to the Alpha for rank assignment. Emily would present herself too, but not for blessing, for condemnation. 3 days until her 20th birthday. 3 days until wolves without their beasts simply stopped waking up. The thought sat in her chest like a stone, cold and heavy. She had never shifted, never felt the wolf that should have awakened years ago. Wolfless. The word tasted like ash on her tongue. In a world where your wolf defined your worth, she had none. She was nothing. And tonight, Jessica would make certain everyone knew it. "Did you hear about the thief?" Abeda's wife swept past, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "Stealing from her own family. Shameless." "A servant, though," her companion replied, adjusting the golden pins in her elaborate braids. What did they expect? No wolf means no honor. Emily's scrub brush stilled for just a heartbeat before she forced herself to continue. They were talking about her. Jessica had been spreading the poison for weeks, careful whispers in the right ears, planting seeds that would bloom tonight into Emily's destruction. The theft accusation was a lie, but who would believe a wolfless servant over Lady Jessica Johnson, widow of the noble Lord Marcus, pillar of the community, respected member of the pack? The memories hit Emily in fragments, the way they always did when she let her guard down. Jessica's hand gripping her hair, forcing her face toward the floor. "You're nothing. You'll always be nothing." The morning tea that tasted bitter, but that Jessica insisted would help her health. 15 years of that tea. 15 years of cruelty wrapped in the language of duty. Your father left you in my care, and I've done my best with such poor material. Emily had been 4 when her father died. 4 when the world became cold and small and painful. She barely remembered him now, just impressions of warmth, of safety, of a voice that called her Little Star. Jessica said he'd been disappointed in her even then, ashamed of a daughter who showed no signs of wolf nature. Jessica said a lot of things, and Emily, beaten down by years of hearing them, had started to believe. Emily. The voice froze her blood. She looked up to find Jessica standing over her, magnificent in a gown of midnight blue that made her pale skin glow like moonlight. Beautiful, cold, cruel. Jessica's smile didn't reach her eyes as she surveyed Emily kneeling in dirty water, surrounded by nobles who had stopped to watch the interaction. "Tonight, stepdaughter," Jessica said softly, each word precisely chosen for maximum impact, "you'll finally get what you've always deserved. Nothing." The ceremonial drums began before Emily could respond, deep and resonant, signaling the ceremony's start. Pack members moved toward the great circle in the hall's center, forming concentric rings around the judgment space. Young wolves lined up at the edge, nervous and excited, dressed in their finest clothes as they prepared to present themselves for rank assignment. Emily watched them with something that might have been envy if she'd had any emotion left to spare. The pack hierarchy was ancient and absolute. Alphas ruled with supernatural authority. Their word was law, their power unquestioned. Beneath them, betas managed, and, enforced, gammas served as warriors and guards. Omegas held the lowest wolf rank, but still possessed their beasts, still belonged to the pack's heart. And then there were servants, wolfless, rankless, worthless. Emily had cleaned the floors these young wolves would kneel on. She had washed their ceremonial clothes, prepared their feast, lived in the shadows of their world without ever being part of it. Tonight she would kneel in that circle, not for blessing, but for judgment, accused of theft, marked for exile, or death. She wasn't sure which would be worse. The drums shifted rhythm, and the hall fell silent. Alpha King Gregory Frank entered through the great doors, and the very air seemed to bend around him. Emily had never been this close to the Alpha King before. Servants didn't get close to royalty. They existed in different worlds that only occasionally, accidentally, overlapped. But even from across the hall, she could feel the weight of his presence, the raw power that made her, skin prickle with instinctive awareness. He was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a predator's grace that suggested violence held in check. His eyes, silver as winter moonlight, swept across the assembled pack with an authority that needed no words. Gregory rarely attended regional ceremonies. The Alpha King had a kingdom to rule, wars to prevent, politics to navigate. His presence tonight was unusual, ominous. Emily's stomach knotted with fresh fear. Jessica had planned this perfectly, ensured the Alpha King himself would witness Emily's humiliation, would pass judgment on the worthless servant girl who dared steal from her betters. The ceremony began with the traditional blessings, young wolves presenting themselves one by one to receive Gregory's assessment. Emily barely heard their names, barely registered the ranks assigned. Her mind was spiraling, trapped between the past that had broken her and the future that promised only more pain. When the last young wolf had been blessed and assigned their place, the drums fell silent. The hall held its breath. Emily knew what came next. She had known since this morning when Jessica smiled at her over breakfast and said, with false sweetness, "Wear your best dress tonight. You'll want to look presentable." Emily had no best dress. She wore a servant's rough-spun tunic and skirt, mended a dozen times, stained with years of labor. It was all she had, all Jessica had ever allowed her to have. "There is one final matter." Jessica's voice rang out, clear and carrying, pitched for maximum dramatic effect. She stepped into the judgment circle, and every eye turned toward her. "Your Majesty, honored pack, I bring a grievous accusation before this sacred gathering." Emily's legs wouldn't hold her. She remained kneeling beside her bucket, watching her own destruction unfold. Jessica's hand rose, something glinting between her fingers. A necklace, ornate, ancient, set with gemstones that caught the torchlight and threw it back, in rainbow fractals, beautiful, priceless. And Emily had never seen it before in her life. "This servant girl," Jessica said, her voice heavy with betrayed sorrow, "has stolen from our noble house. This heirloom, passed down through generations of the Johnson family, was taken from my personal chambers. When confronted, she denied it. When searched, it was found hidden among her possessions." The crowd's reaction was immediate. Gasps of shock, murmurs of disgust, voices rising in calls for justice, for punishment, for blood. Emily heard it all from a great distance, as though she were drowning and the world existed somewhere above the water's surface. "I never touched it," Emily heard herself say, her voice barely audible above the crowd's noise. She tried to stand, her legs shaking, water from the bucket soaking through her skirt. "I swear by the moon goddess, I never—" "You dare invoke the goddess?" Jessica's voice cracked like a whip, silencing Emily mid-sentence. "You who have no wolf, no honor. You who have brought shame upon the family that sheltered you, fed you, kept you from the streets where you belong." The words hit like physical blows. Emily's defense died in her throat. What was the point? Who would believe her? She was nothing. She had always been nothing. Jessica had spent 15 years making sure she knew it. "Bring the accused forward." Gregory's voice cut through the chaos, and the command in it made Emily's body move before her mind could process the order. She stumbled toward the judgment circle, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. The crowd parted around her as though she carried disease. She reached the center of the circle and dropped to her knees on the same stones she had just finished scrubbing. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. Gregory approached, his footsteps echoing in the sudden, terrible silence. Each step felt like a countdown, like the final moments before an execution. Emily kept her head bowed, kept her eyes on the stones, because looking up meant seeing the disgust on all those faces, meant seeing the cold satisfaction on Jessica's beautiful features, meant facing the end of any hope she had ever harbored that her life might be worth living. Gregory stopped directly in front of her. Emily could see his boots, fine leather and polished to a mirror shine, so close she could have touched them if she'd dared. She didn't dare. She had learned, over 15 years of systematic cruelty, not to dare anything. "Look at me," Gregory said, and his voice was quieter now, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. Emily forced her head up, forced herself to meet the Alpha King's silver eyes. They were cold, assessing, looking at her the way one might examine an insect before deciding whether to crush it or simply ignore it. She waited for the judgment, for the words that would end everything, for the mercy of finally being cast out so she could stop pretending there was anything worth staying for. And then something inside her broke. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't the slow awakening the young wolves described, the gradual unfurling of their beast nature. This was violence. This was a dam bursting after 15 years of pressure. Heat flooded her veins like wildfire. Pain exploded along every nerve, and Emily gasped as something that had been suffocating beneath Jessica's poison finally, desperately, fought its way to the surface. A scent erupted from her skin, so powerful it was almost visible, rolling off her in waves that made the torches flicker. Emily didn't understand what was happening, couldn't process the sensations overwhelming her senses. But she saw the effect immediately. Wolves throughout the hall staggered. Some dropped to their knees as though struck. Alphas and betas, warriors and nobles, all of them reacting to something Emily couldn't name, couldn't comprehend. The scent was sweet and wild, ancient and new, like moonlight, crystallized into physical form, like honey poured by divine hands, like everything precious and rare and powerful condensed into a single moment. Gregory's eyes flashed pure gold. His wolf surged forward, visible in the way his body tensed, the way his breathing changed, the way every instinct he possessed snapped into singular, absolute focus. He stared at Emily as though seeing her for the first time, as though the dirty servant girl had suddenly transformed into something that defied explanation. And then the Alpha King threw back his head and roared, "She's mine!" The sound shook the rafters. It echoed off stone walls that had stood for 1,000 years. It resonated in every wolf's chest, primal and undeniable, the Alpha's claims spoken in a voice that had never been refused. The pack hall erupted into chaos, wolves shouting over each other, demanding explanation, rejecting the impossible thing they had just witnessed. A servant could not be the true Luna. A wolfless girl could not carry the scent of prophecy. This was madness. This was impossible. This was happening anyway. Jessica's face had gone from triumph to horror in the span of a heartbeat. The color drained from her cheeks, her hands trembling as they clutched the stolen necklace. "No," she whispered, and then louder, desperately, "No, no, that's impossible. She's wolfless. I've raised her for 15 years. I would know." Gregory moved between Emily and Jessica so fast it seemed like teleportation, his body a wall of protection, his presence a warning to everyone in the hall. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Then you've been lying for 15 years. He didn't turn his head, didn't take his eyes off Jessica, but his command rang out clear and final. "Guards, seize Lady Jessica Johnson. No one leaves this hall until I have answers." The last thing Emily saw before darkness claimed her vision was Jessica's face, beautiful and cold and terrified, as guards moved forward to take her into custody. The last thing she felt was the overwhelming pressure of her wolf, finally, after 20 years of poisoned suppression, fighting its way to freedom. The last thing she heard was Gregory's voice, softer now, meant only for her, as she collapsed forward. "I have you. You're safe now." And then there was nothing but merciful unconsciousness and the distant, impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd been wrong about deserving nothing after all. If this story is already pulling at your heart, if you felt Emily's desperation and Gregory's powerful claim, then you need to stay for what comes next, because this is just the beginning. The lies Jessica has told go deeper than anyone imagines, and the truth about who Emily really is will shake this kingdom to its foundation. Make sure you're subscribed and that notification bell is on, because you won't want to miss how this unfolds. And if you're already hooked, hit that like button so I know you're ready for the rest of this journey. Trust me, what's coming next will leave you speechless. Emily woke to silk. The sensation was so foreign, so completely outside her experience, that for a moment she thought she was still unconscious, dreaming of a life that had never been hers. Silk sheets beneath her fingers, silk pillows cradling her head, the scent of cedar and winter pine surrounding her, masculine and comforting in a way that made her wolf. Her wolf. She had a wolf now. The thought was still impossible. Settle with contentment she had never known. She opened her eyes to a chamber that belonged in stories, not reality. Vaulted ceilings carved with intricate wolf motifs, tapestries depicting ancient battles and moon-blessed ceremonies, a fireplace large enough to stand in, flames dancing behind an ornate silver screen, windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, showing a night sky still dominated by the full moon that had witnessed her transformation. And sitting in a chair beside her bed, silver eyes reflecting firelight, was Alpha King Gregory Frank. He had been watching her sleep. The realization should have terrified her, should have sent her scrambling backward with apologies for daring to exist in his presence. Instead, something in her chest loosened, as though a fist that had been clenched around her heart for 15 years had finally released its grip. "You're safe now," Gregory said, and his voice was different from the commanding roar in the pack hall. Gentler, meant only for her. "Whatever happened to you, whatever was done to you, it ends tonight." Emily tried to sit up, and pain lanced through her skull, sharp enough to make her gasp. Gregory was beside her instantly, his hand supporting her back, easing her against the pillows with a care that contradicted everything she knew about alphas and power, and the distance between kings and servants. "I don't understand," Emily whispered, her voice raw from screaming she didn't remember. "I'm nobody. I'm wolfless. You are my mate," Gregory interrupted, and the certainty in his voice left no room for argument. "You bear royal blood, and someone has been hiding you." The words made no sense. Royal blood. She was a servant, a nobody. Jessica had told her 1,000 times, had made sure she understood her place in the world's hierarchy, had beaten the truth into her bones until she couldn't imagine being anything else. But Gregory was looking at her as though she mattered, as though she was worth the vigil he had apparently kept while she lay unconscious, as though she was exactly what he had said, his mate. "I don't know what I am," Emily admitted, and the vulnerability in her own voice made her want to hide. "I've never known. I thought I was broken." "You're not broken," Gregory said, and his hand found hers, large and warm and steady. "But I intend to find out what was done to make you believe you were." A knock at the door interrupted whatever Emily might have said next. Gregory's expression shifted, became the Alpha King's mask of authority, though his hand didn't leave hers. "Enter," he commanded. An elderly man stepped through the doorway, his robes marking him as a healer, his face creased with the lines of someone who had seen too much suffering. He carried a leather bag that clinked with glass vials and metal instruments, and his eyes, kind eyes, Emily noticed with surprise, assessed her with professional concern. "Master Healer Benedict," Gregory said, his tone formal now. "Thank you for coming so quickly. Your Majesty." Benedict bowed, then approached the bed with a healer's practiced calm. "My lady, I need to examine you. His Majesty believes you may have been poisoned. May I?" Emily nodded, not trusting her voice. Poisoned? The word seemed impossible, like something from the stories she used to hear whispered in the servants' quarters about political intrigue and assassination attempts, not something that happened to people, like her. Benedict's examination was thorough and surprisingly gentle. He checked her eyes, her pulse, her breathing. He asked questions about her health history, her diet, her daily routines. And with each answer Emily gave, his expression grew darker, more troubled. Finally, he withdrew a small silver needle from his bag. "This will prick, but only for a moment," he warned, and drew a single drop of blood from Emily's finger onto a glass slide. He held it up to the firelight, added something from a vial that made the blood shimmer and change color, and went absolutely still. "What is it?" Gregory's voice was carefully controlled, but Emily could hear the edge beneath it, the Alpha's fury held in check by force of will. "Wolfsbane," Benedict said, and the word fell into the room like a stone into still water. Concentrated wolfsbane administered regularly over an extended period. Years, Your Majesty. This level of exposure could only result from years of systematic poisoning. The room tilted. Emily gripped the silk sheets, trying to anchor herself to something real, something solid, as her entire understanding of her life rewrote itself in a single moment. Gregory stood, and the movement was so controlled it was terrifying. "Someone," he said, and his voice was winter itself, "has been poisoning my mate since childhood." "The dosage suggests daily administration," Benedict continued, his voice heavy with professional outrage. "Wolfsbane tea, most likely, given every morning with enough honey or herbs to mask the bitter taste. It would suppress wolf awakening indefinitely, make the victim appear wolfless while slowly destroying their connection to their beast nature." 15 years, Emily heard herself say. Her voice sounded distant, detached, as though it belonged to someone else. "She gave me tea every morning for 15 years. Both men turned to look at her. "Who?" Gregory asked, though Emily suspected he already knew the answer. "Jessica, my stepmother." The words felt strange on Emily's tongue, as though she were speaking a foreign language. "She said it was for my health. She said I was sickly, that I needed it to stay strong. Every single day she watched me drink it. Every single day." The realization crashed over her like a wave. Not broken, not defective, not born without a wolf. Deliberately sabotaged, systematically destroyed. 15 years of carefully administered poison, designed to make her believe she was less than nothing, designed to steal her very nature, designed to keep her powerless and small and afraid. Emily's hands started to shake, then her whole body. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process the enormity of what had been done to her. Jessica hadn't just been cruel. She hadn't just been cold or neglectful or occasionally violent. She had been methodically, carefully, deliberately erasing Emily's identity, one poisoned cup at a time. Gregory was there again, his arms around her, holding her together while she shattered. "Breathe," he said quietly. "Just breathe. You're safe. She can't hurt you anymore." But she had hurt her. For 15 years she had hurt her every single day, and Emily had thought it was normal, had thought she deserved it, had thought there was something fundamentally wrong with her that made Jessica's cruelty justified. "I need answers," Gregory said over Emily's head, addressing Benedict. And I need them now. Summon court advisor Damian Pierce. Have him bring all records pertaining to Emily Helena Johnson. Everything. Birth certificates, death certificates, property records, guardianship papers, everything. At once, Your Majesty, Benedict said, and Emily heard genuine sympathy in his voice as he added, My lady, you are stronger than you know. To survive 15 years of wolfsbane poisoning and still awaken your wolf, that speaks to a power most of us will never possess. Then he was gone, and Emily was left alone with Gregory and the terrible new knowledge that her entire life had been a lie. Court advisor Damian Pierce arrived 20 minutes later, his arms full of leather-bound record books, his expression nervous in a way that immediately caught Emily's attention. She'd seen that expression before, on servants who had been caught stealing food, on guards who had failed their duties. Guilt, fear, the look of someone who knew they had done something wrong and was about to be caught. Gregory noticed it too. Emily could tell by the way his posture shifted, became more predatory, more focused. He didn't invite Damian to sit, didn't offer the courtesy usually extended to court advisors. He simply stood before the massive desk in his chambers and waited. Your Majesty requested records? Damian's voice was too high, too eager to please. I did. Gregory's tone was neutral, which somehow made it more dangerous. Tell me, Advisor Pierce, what do you know about Princess Helena of the Northern Territories? Damian's hands tightened on the record books. Princess Helena. She died 16 years ago, Your Majesty. A tragic fire that claimed her and her young daughter. And her daughter's name? Emily Helena Johnson, Your Majesty. 4 years old at the time of death. Gregory's eyes never left Damian's face. Emily watched from the bed, wrapped in a silk robe someone had laid out for her, and saw the Alpha King at work. This wasn't the protective mate who had held her while she cried. This was the ruler who had united a fractured kingdom, who had ended wars through strategy and force of will, who missed nothing and forgot less. Then explain to me, Gregory said softly, why I can smell royal bloodline markers on the woman in that bed. Damian went pale. I don't know what you mean, Your Majesty. Don't you? Gregory picked up one of the record books, flipped it open to a page that had been marked with a ribbon. Princess Helena was my father's younger sister. Royal blood, pure and unmixed. When she married Lord Marcus Johnson, it was understood that any children would carry that bloodline forward. Her daughter, this Emily Helena Johnson, he tapped the page, would have been my cousin, would have inherited the Northern Territories upon reaching maturity. Yes, Your Majesty, but the child died. Did she? Gregory's voice could have cut glass, because the woman in that bed carries the exact scent markers that identify the Northern Territories bloodline, the same markers my aunt carried, the same markers that are supposed to be extinct because the last carrier died in a fire 20 years ago. Damian's hands were trembling now, making the record books shake. The records are clear, Your Majesty. Emily Helena Johnson, deceased, age 4. Show me the death certificate. The command hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Damian fumbled through the books, his fingers clumsy with nerves, and finally withdrew a yellowed document. Gregory took it, studied it for a long moment, and Emily saw his expression change, become colder, more dangerous. This signature, Gregory said, his finger pointing to a scrawled name at the bottom of the certificate. Whose is it? Damian's voice was barely a whisper. Mine, Your Majesty. Yours. Gregory set the document down with careful precision. You certified the death of Princess Helena's daughter. You, who were a minor clerk at the time, barely 20 years old. You signed off on the death of a royal heir. I was told to, Your Majesty. Lady Jessica Johnson, the child's guardian after Lord Marcus died. She brought the body. She explained about the fire. And you never questioned it? Never wondered why a 4-year-old child's body was so badly burned it was unrecognizable? Never thought it strange that a servant girl who happened to look similar to the young princess had gone missing the same night. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed started falling into place. A fire, a body, a 4-year-old girl who was supposed to be dead but was instead raised as a servant by the woman who should have been her guardian. "Bring me Lady Jessica," Gregory said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "And double the guard on Advisor Pierce. No one is above suspicion, not anymore." Jessica arrived in chains. The sight of it sent a shock through Emily's system. Jessica, who had always been untouchable, who had ruled their household with cold perfection, who had never shown a moment of vulnerability or weakness, brought before the Alpha King in iron shackles, her beautiful midnight blue gown torn at the hem, her perfectly arranged hair disheveled from struggle. But her face was composed, her voice steady as she spoke. "Your Majesty, this is outrageous. I demand to know why I've been arrested like a common criminal." "You stand accused of conspiracy and assault against my mate," Gregory said, and something in Jessica's expression flickered. Fear, quickly suppressed. "The servant girl has bewitched you, Your Majesty. Dark magic it must be to make you believe such lies about—" Gregory held up a glass vial, the liquid inside catching the firelight. "This is the tea you gave Emily every morning for 15 years. Master Healer Benedict found it in your private chambers. It contains enough wolfsbane to suppress a young wolf's awakening indefinitely." Jessica's mask didn't crack. "I was trying to help her. She showed signs of rabies after being bitten by a rogue wolf. I was treating her, preventing her from turning into something dangerous." Rabies. Gregory's tone suggested exactly how much he believed that explanation. He set the vial down and picked up something else. The necklace. The one Jessica had accused Emily of stealing. It glinted in the firelight, the gemstones seeming to glow with an inner radiance. Gregory turned it over in his hands, examining the craftsmanship with an expert's eye. Emily watched recognition flash across his face, watched his expression go from cold to absolutely glacial. "This necklace," he said quietly, and the quiet was more terrifying than any shout could have been. "Where did you get this?" "It's been in my family for generations, Your Majesty. An heirloom from— This is the Northern Territory's royal seal." Gregory's voice could have frozen fire. "The crest is unmistakable. This particular design was commissioned by my aunt, Princess Helena, as a birthday gift for her daughter. I was there when she had it made. I remember the jeweler describing how he set each stone to catch moonlight." He looked up, his silver eyes boring into Jessica. "This necklace was given to Princess Helena's daughter when she was 3 years old, approximately 1 year before the fire that was meant to kill her." The chamber went utterly silent. Even Jessica seemed to realize she had made a critical mistake. "So I'll ask you again, Jessica," Gregory said, and each word was precisely chosen, deliberately spoken. "Where did you get this necklace?" Jessica's composure held for one more heartbeat. 2. Then something in her expression shifted, and Emily saw the mask crack, saw the rage that had always been there beneath the cold beauty finally break through to the surface. "You want the truth?" Jessica hissed, and her voice was stripped of all pretense now, raw with 15 years of carefully controlled hatred. "Fine. That stupid child should have died in the fire with the servant girl I put in her place. I burned that manor to the ground, and she was supposed to burn with it." Emily's world tilted. She gripped the arms of the chair where Gregory had positioned her, hidden behind a screen so she could hear but not be seen, and felt reality rearrange itself into a shape she couldn't comprehend. "But she survived," Jessica continued, and now that she had started, the words poured out like poison from a lanced wound. "So I made sure she'd live as what she deserved. Nothing. No wolf, no power, no memory of who she really was. just a servant, cleaning floors and thanking me for the privilege. The pack council chamber, for that was where they had moved for this confrontation, Emily realized, went silent. 15 years of lies shattered in a single confession, and Emily, listening from behind her screen, felt the last foundations of her identity crumble beneath the weight of a truth she had never imagined. She wasn't Emily the servant. She wasn't Emily the wolfless. She wasn't even really Emily Johnson. She was Emily Helena Johnson, daughter of Princess Helena of the Northern Territories, heir to lands and titles that should have been hers, survivor of a murder attempt that should have killed her when she was 4 years old, and the woman who had raised her, who had spent 15 years making sure she believed she was worthless, had been trying to erase her from existence all along. The story gets darker from here, and Jessica's crimes run deeper than anyone imagined. Emily's about to discover she's not just the Alpha's mate, she's royalty who was stolen, hidden, and nearly destroyed by the woman she called Stepmother. If you need to know what happens when Emily finally confronts Jessica face to face, when she remembers everything that was taken from her, stay with this story. The next chapter will break your heart and put it back together. Make sure you're here for it. That night, Emily's wolf came for her memories. She had fallen asleep in Gregory's chambers, exhausted from Jessica's confession, from the weight of revelations that had rewritten her entire existence. Gregory had stayed beside her bed again, his presence a comfort she was still learning to accept. She remembered his hand holding hers as her eyes closed, remembered feeling safe for perhaps the first time in 15 years. And then the memories hit like a battering ram through a locked door. This wasn't the gentle awakening the stories described, wasn't the peaceful unfurling of suppressed wolf nature. This was violence. This was 15 years of poison breaking all at once, 15 years of buried trauma clawing its way to the surface with teeth and claws and desperate fury. Emily's wolf didn't ease her into the past. It threw her there. The fire. 4-year-old Emily stood in her bedroom, confusion giving way to terror as smoke began seeping under the door. She could hear crackling, could smell burning wood, could feel heat building on the other side of the wooden barrier between her and escape. She ran to the door, tried the handle, found it locked from the outside. "Help!" Her child's voice was high and frightened. "Someone help me!" The door cracked open, just enough for Emily to see through. Jessica stood on the other side, beautiful even through smoke, her face utterly calm as she watched a child realize she was going to die. "You're no one now," Jessica said, and her voice was almost gentle, almost kind. "You'll always be no one." Then Jessica stepped back, and Emily saw what she carried. Another child. A servant girl with brown hair like Emily's, dressed in Emily's favorite nightgown, her head lolling at an angle that made Emily's stomach hurt, even though she didn't understand why. The girl wasn't moving, would never move again. Jessica disappeared down the corridor, carrying the body toward the burning east wing. Emily pressed her face against the door crack, watching, not understanding, but knowing with a child's instinct that something terrible was happening, something that would change everything. The memory shifted, and adult Emily tried to scream, tried to wake up, but her wolf held her there with implacable force. You need to see, you need to remember her father's death. 6 months earlier, Emily was 3.5, small enough to hide behind the heavy curtains in her father's study when she wasn't supposed to be there. She had been playing hide and seek with a servant girl, had chosen this spot because it was warm near the fireplace, and she could peek out to see when she was found. But the servant girl never came. Her father did instead, and he wasn't alone. Jessica entered behind him, carrying a tray with tea. Marcus Johnson looked tired, Emily remembered, older than his years. He had been sick for months, the servants whispered, though no healer could determine why he grew weaker with each passing week. "You should rest, my lord," Jessica said, setting the tea on his desk. "You've been working too hard." "I need to update Emily's trust documents," Marcus replied, his voice hoarse. "Something feels wrong, Jessica. I can't explain it, but I need to ensure my daughter is protected if—" "Drink your tea first," Jessica interrupted smoothly. "It will help with the pain." Emily watched her father lift the cup to his lips, watched him drink, watched his expression change from tired to confused, to terrified in the span of 3 heartbeats. The cup fell from his hands, shattered on the floor. Marcus tried to stand, tried to speak, but his throat was already closing. He reached toward the door, toward help, toward anything that might save him, but his legs wouldn't hold him. He collapsed, choking, his hands scrabbling at his collar as though he could tear away whatever was stealing his breath. And Jessica stood there, watching. She didn't call for help, didn't try to save him. She simply stood there with that small, satisfied smile, watching her husband die by her own hand, watching him realize in his final moments exactly what she was. Behind the curtain, 3-year-old Emily pressed both hands over her mouth to keep from making a sound, tears streaming down her face, too terrified to move, too young to understand, but old enough to know that if Jessica saw her, she would die too. Marcus's eyes found Jessica one last time. She leaned down, her face close to his, and whispered something Emily couldn't hear. Then his eyes went empty, and the man who had called Emily Little Star was gone. Jessica straightened, smoothed her skirts, and called for the guards. "Help! My lord husband has collapsed! Someone fetch a healer!" Her performance was flawless. Her tears looked real. And no one questioned the grieving widow when she explained that Marcus had simply succumbed to the illness that had plagued him for months. The memory released Emily just long enough for her to gasp, to feel Gregory's hands on her shoulders, to hear his voice calling her name. Then her wolf dragged her down again, and this time the memory was older, warmer, achingly beautiful. Her mother. Emily was 3 years old, sitting on her mother's lap in a bedroom filled with afternoon sunlight. Princess Helena was laughing, her hair the same brown as Emily's, her eyes warm with love as she fastened a necklace around her daughter's small neck. "This will always remind you who you are, my little star," Helena said, her fingers gentle as she adjusted the chain. "Always." The necklace caught the light, gemstones glowing like captured pieces of the moon. Emily touched it with wondering fingers, felt its weight against her chest, felt loved in a way that made the whole world seem safe. "What am I, Mama?" Emily asked, because she was 3 and curious about everything. Helena's smile was soft with affection. "You are my daughter. You are brave and kind and strong. You are going to do wonderful things, Emily, and no matter what happens, no matter how dark the world becomes, remember, you are loved. You are valuable. You are exactly who you're meant to be." "Always?" Emily asked. "Always," her mother promised. Then the memory fragmented, dissolved, and Emily was screaming herself awake in Gregory's chambers, her voice raw with 15 years of suppressed grief, her body shaking so violently she thought she might fly apart. Gregory's arms came around her before she finished drawing breath for another scream. He held her together while she shattered, held her through sobs that felt like they would tear her open, held her while she mourned, not just for her murdered father and lost mother, but for the child she had been, the one who had been loved and precious and safe before Jessica had stolen everything. "I remember," Emily gasped between sobs. "I remember all of it. My father, the fire, my mother, Gregory. She killed them. She killed them both." "I know," Gregory said quietly, his hand steady on her back. "I know, and she will answer for it. All of it." They stayed like that until dawn broke, until Emily's tears ran dry, until the memories settled into something she could carry instead of something that carried her. And when morning light finally spilled through the windows, Emily felt different, still hurt, still grieving, but no longer broken. She knew who she was now. She remembered. By mid-morning, Emily had made her decision. She stood before Gregory in his private council chamber, dressed in borrowed clothes that actually fit, her hair braided back from a face that no longer looked like a servant's. "I want to see her," Emily said, and her voice was steady. "I want to face Jessica." Gregory hesitated, concern flickering across his features. "Emily, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." She met his eyes, and something in her gaze must have convinced him because he nodded slowly. "I'll be right outside the cell," he said. "If you need me." "I know." The dungeons beneath the royal palace were old stone and iron, lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on walls that had witnessed centuries of justice and judgment. Guards opened the heavy door to Jessica's cell, and Emily walked through alone. Jessica sat on a stone bench, still wearing the torn midnight blue gown, her hair disheveled, but her posture perfect. She looked up as Emily entered, and something flickered across her face. Surprise, quickly masked. "Come to gloat?" Jessica asked, her voice carrying that familiar edge of disdain. "The servant girl playing princess?" "I remember everything now," Emily said quietly. The words hung in the air between them. Jessica's expression shifted, became calculating, searching for an angle, a manipulation that might still work. "You were a burden," Jessica said, her tone shifting to false sympathy. "Your father married me for help with you, and you were such a difficult child, so sickly, so weak. I did my best, but—" "You killed my father," Emily interrupted, and her voice was calm, factual, stripped of the desperate need for approval that had colored every interaction they'd had for 15 years. "I watched you poison him. I was 3 years old, hiding behind the curtains in his study. I saw you smile while he died." Jessica's mask flickered. "You burned my home," Emily continued, taking a step forward. "You murdered a servant girl and put her body in my place. You locked me in a room full of smoke and told me I was no one. Then you raised me as a servant, spent 15 years poisoning me, making sure I never remembered who I really was." "You can't prove any of that," Jessica said, but her voice had lost its certainty. "I don't need to prove it. You already confessed in front of the entire Pack Council." Emily took another step closer. "You stole 15 years of my life. You stole my identity, my inheritance, my family, and you did it for money. You were supposed to die." Jessica's composure finally shattered completely, her face contorting with rage that had been hidden beneath cold beauty for 2 decades. "You were supposed to be nothing. That manor should have burned to ash with you in it, but you survived, so I made sure you'd live as less than nothing, and you thanked me for it." The words should have hurt. A day ago, they would have destroyed Emily. But standing here now, with her memories intact and her wolf fully awakened, Emily felt something different. Pity. "I was never nothing," she said softly. "You just spent 15 years trying to convince me I was." Tears burned in Emily's eyes, but they weren't tears of weakness or shame. They were grief, finally acknowledged, finally allowed to exist. Grief for her father who had loved her and died trying to protect her. Grief for her mother who had promised she was valuable and hadn't lived to keep her safe. Grief for the childhood that had been stolen, for the years spent believing she deserved cruelty. "You took everything from me," Emily said, and her voice broke on the words. "But you couldn't take who I am. My mother told me I was brave and kind and strong. She told me I was loved. And that was true then, and it's true now, and nothing you did could change it." She turned toward the door, toward freedom, toward the life that was waiting for her beyond this cell and this woman and these 15 years of lies. "I hope you remember that," Emily said quietly. "When they pass judgment on you, I hope you remember that you destroyed yourself, trying to destroy me, and that I survived anyway." While Emily confronted her past in the dungeons, the Pack Council chambers above were uncovering a conspiracy that ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Gregory stood before the assembled council, court advisor Damian Pierce in chains beside him, while documents were spread across the massive oak table: financial records, property deeds, death certificates, the paper trail of 15 years of systematic fraud. "The records are clear," Gregory said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "Damian Pierce, you didn't just falsify a death certificate. You conspired with Jessica Johnson to fake the death of a royal heir, embezzle kingdom funds, and plan the murder of that heir upon reaching legal majority." Damian's face was ashen. "Your Majesty, I was coerced. I never meant—" "You were promised the Johnson estates," Gregory interrupted, tapping a document that bore both Damian's and Jessica's signatures. "Upon Emily's legal death at age 20, the lands would pass to Jessica as guardian. She would then sell them to you at a fraction of their value. Half a kingdom's worth of territory for pocket change," the council members murmured, shock and outrage rippling through the assembly. "Emily turns 20 in 2 days," Gregory continued, and his voice turned colder. "The carriage accident was already arranged, the driver was paid, the route was planned. If I had not attended that moonrise ceremony, if Emily had not awakened in front of witnesses, she would have died in 2 days, and no one would have questioned it." Master of Coin Edmund Thornwick stood, his face grave as he presented another ledger. "There's more, Your Majesty. Jessica Johnson has been collecting royal orphan stipends for 15 years, 10,000 gold pieces annually, supposedly to maintain Emily Helena Johnson's memorial estate and fund charitable works in her name." 150,000 gold pieces, Gregory said, and the sum hung in the air like an executioner's blade. "Stolen from the kingdom, while the true Emily scrubbed floors and thanked Jessica for scraps." "The money funded my gambling debts," Damian whispered, his confession barely audible. "Jessica said there was plenty that no one would notice. I never thought, I didn't realize—" "You didn't care," Gregory corrected coldly. "As long as you profited, you didn't care that an innocent child was being systematically destroyed." The formal charges were read before the full council. Murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, embezzlement, falsification of royal documents. Each charge carried a potential death sentence. Combined, they painted a picture of corruption so complete, so calculated, that even the most jaded council members looked shaken. "What does the victim request?" High Chancellor Margaret Ashford asked, her voice heavy with the weight of her office. All eyes turned to Emily, who had entered the chamber during the proceedings, taking her place beside Gregory as was her right as his acknowledged mate. She looked different from the servant girl who had scrubbed these floors days ago, stronger, certain. "I want a blood trial," Emily said clearly. Murmurs swept through the chamber. Blood trials were ancient, rarely invoked, reserved for crimes so heinous that normal justice seemed insufficient. Gregory turned to her, his expression questioning. "Emily, immediate execution would be cleaner. The blood trial is public, brutal. Are you certain?" "Yes." Emily's voice didn't waver. "I want everyone to hear what she did. Every servant, every omega, everyone who's been treated as less than, everyone who's been told they're nothing. I want them to hear that cruelty doesn't go unanswered, that truth matters, that justice exists even for people like me." She met Gregory's eyes. "Let them witness." "Then it's decided," Gregory announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Blood trial will be held tomorrow night during the mate recognition feast. The entire kingdom will witness judgment passed on Jessica the Nameless and Damian Pierce." Jessica and Damian were led away to separate cells to await their fate. The council chamber slowly emptied as arrangements began for tomorrow's feast and trial. Emily found herself standing beside Gregory on the council chamber balcony, watching the kingdom below prepare for what would be either celebration or execution, depending on whose perspective you held. Movement caught her eye, Jessica being led across the courtyard toward her cell, guards on either side. For just a moment, as though she felt Emily's gaze, Jessica looked up. Their eyes met across the distance. Jessica's face twisted with pure hatred, with rage that had lost all pretense of civility or control. Her lips moved, forming words Emily could read clearly even from the balcony. "This isn't over." Emily's hand found Gregory's, her fingers threading through his, drawing strength from his presence and from the truth she had finally claimed. She squeezed once. Then she mouthed her own response, making sure Jessica could see, making sure she understood. "Oh yes, it is." The great hall had been transformed overnight into something from the old stories, from the time when the moon goddess herself walked among her wolves and blessed their unions under silver light. Emily stood at the chamber's entrance, barely recognizing the space where she had once scrubbed floors on her hands and knees. Thousands of candles cast dancing shadows across walls draped in silver and white silk. The ancient wolf tapestries had been brought out from storage, each one depicting a legendary Luna and her alpha, their stories woven in thread that gleamed like captured starlight. Tables laden with food stretched the length of the hall, and wolves from across the kingdom filled every available space, their voices rising in celebration of what should have been impossible. A true Luna found, a mate bond recognized, a kingdom's future secured. Emily herself wore a gown that made her feel like she was wearing moonlight. Silver fabric flowed from her shoulders to the floor, embroidered with white wolves that seemed to move in the candlelight. Her hair had been braided with pearls and small diamonds, and around her neck hung the necklace, the Northern Territory's royal seal, her mother's final gift, returned to its rightful place after 15 years of being called stolen property. She touched it now, drawing strength from the weight of it against her collarbone, from the memory of her mother's voice promising she was loved, promising she was valuable, promising she was exactly who she was meant to be. "You're beautiful," Gregory said beside her, and the reverence in his voice made something warm unfold in her chest. He wore ceremonial armor, silver and black, marked with the symbols of his authority. Together they looked like what they were, Alpha King and true Luna, ready to be formally recognized before the entire kingdom. But pack law was ancient and absolute. The accused must be present for Luna ceremonies, which meant Jessica would be here tonight. Emily saw her the moment they entered the hall, saw the crowd part to allow guards through with their prisoner. Jessica wore a simple gray dress, the kind servants wore, her hands bound with iron chains. Her hair hung loose and unbrushed, her face bare of the cosmetics that had always made her beautiful. She looked diminished, broken. As she was led to a guarded corner of the hall, her eyes found the floor and stayed there. "She looks different," Emily said quietly, and hated that part of her still felt something when she looked at the woman who had raised her. Not love, but something complicated and painful that might have been grief for the family she had never really had. "She looks apologetic," Gregory corrected, his voice carrying a warning Emily couldn't quite interpret. His hand found hers, squeezed gently. "People like her don't change, Emily. They adapt. They find new strategies. They play whatever role gets them what they want." Emily looked up at him, saw the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes never stopped scanning the hall, cataloging exits and threats and potential dangers. "You think she'll try something? I think she has nothing left to lose." Gregory's thumb traced a circle on the back of her hand. "Stay close to me tonight." The feast began with the traditional blessings, with Gregory's formal announcement of their mate bond before the assembled kingdom. Emily felt hundreds of eyes on her as she knelt before the Alpha King, felt the weight of expectation and curiosity and judgment from wolves who still remembered her as the servant girl who had scrubbed their floors. But when Gregory placed his hand on her head and spoke the ancient words that recognized her as true Luna, when the mate bond flared between them bright enough that every wolf in the hall could feel its power, the whispers stopped. This was real. This was sanctioned by the moon goddess herself, and no amount of gossip or doubt could change that truth. The feast continued with music and dancing, with wolves from across the kingdom approaching to offer their respects and allegiance to their new Luna. Emily smiled until her face hurt, accepted congratulations from people who had ignored her existence days ago, and tried to ignore the weight of Jessica's presence in the corner like a shadow at the edge of celebration. Then, midway through the feast, Jessica moved. She approached slowly, her guards flanking her, her chains jingling softly with each step. The music didn't stop, but conversations died as wolves noticed her progression toward the high table where Emily and Gregory sat. By the time Jessica reached them, the entire hall had fallen silent, every eye watching to see what would happen next. Jessica dropped to her knees, her chains pooling on the floor, her head bowed in perfect submission. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion, breaking on the words as though tears choked them. "Your Majesty, my lady." She didn't look up, kept her eyes on the floor. "I've had time to reflect on my sins against my stepdaughter, against the princess, against the woman who should have been my daughter in truth, not just in name." Emily's breath caught. The performance was flawless. Jessica's voice trembled with what sounded like genuine remorse, her shoulders shaking as though she were struggling to control overwhelming grief. "I don't expect forgiveness," Jessica continued. "I don't deserve it. What I did was monstrous, driven by greed and jealousy, and a darkness I can't explain or excuse. But before judgment is passed, I wanted to say—" Her voice broke completely, and she drew a shuddering breath. "I wanted to say I'm sorry, for all of it, for every moment of pain I caused, for the years I stole, for the child I tried to destroy." She lifted her head and tears streamed down her face, real tears that caught the candlelight. "Please," she whispered, "please accept this wine as penance, as a symbolic offering of peace. I know it can't undo what I've done, but perhaps it can be a beginning. A recognition that you were always worthy of celebration, always deserving of honor, always meant for exactly this." A guard stepped forward carrying a silver cup filled with dark red wine. Jessica took it with trembling hands, held it out toward Emily, and the desperation in her eyes looked absolutely genuine. Emily stared at the cup. Part of her, the part that was still that 4-year-old child desperate for any scrap of affection, any sign that the woman who raised her might have loved her after all, wanted to believe this was real, wanted to believe people could change, that remorse could be genuine, that 15 years of cruelty might be acknowledged and atoned for. Her hand reached for the cup, and her wolf screamed. Warning exploded through Emily's consciousness with such force that she jerked backward, knocking her chair over as she scrambled away from Jessica's offered cup. The reaction was pure instinct, bypassing thought entirely, her newly awakened wolf nature recognizing danger even when her human mind wanted to believe in redemption. "Emily?" Gregory was on his feet instantly, his body between her and Jessica, his voice sharp with command. "What's wrong?" "The cup," Emily gasped. "Don't let anyone touch the cup." Jessica's expression flickered, just for a heartbeat, just long enough for Emily to see calculation replace remorse, before the mask of repentance settled back into place. "I don't understand. It's just wine. I swear I only wanted—" "Drop it," Gregory ordered, and the alpha command in his voice left no room for disobedience. Jessica's hands opened. The cup fell. It shattered against the stone floor, and the wine spread across ancient stones that had witnessed 1,000 feasts, 1,000 celebrations. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the wine began to smoke. The stones themselves started to dissolve where the liquid touched them, acid eating through rock that had stood for centuries. The chemical reaction filled the air with a smell like burning metal and rotted flowers, and Emily recognized it immediately. Monkshood mixed with silver dust, enough to stop a heart within minutes, enough to kill a Luna in front of her entire kingdom and make it look like some mysterious affliction, some tragic weakness that no healer could have predicted or prevented. Gasps of horror rippled through the hall. Wolves stumbled backward, away from the spreading poison, away from Jessica, who knelt in the center of an expanding circle of empty space, as though her mere presence carried contamination. "Guards!" Gregory's roar shook the rafters, but Jessica was already moving. The broken, apologetic woman vanished as though she had never existed, replaced by something cold and desperate and absolutely lethal. Her hand dove into her sleeve. How had the guards missed searching her? And came out with a blade that gleamed silver in the candlelight. "If you won't drink it—" Jessica lunged, the blade aimed directly at Emily's heart. "I'll finish this myself!" Gregory shifted before the sentence finished, his transformation so fast it seemed like magic rather than the physical process it was. One moment he stood in human form, the next his massive black wolf form blocked Jessica's path, his jaws already opening to intercept the strike. He caught Jessica's wrist before the blade could reach Emily, his teeth closing with enough force that Emily heard bones crunch. The silver dagger clattered to the floor, spinning away across stones, and Jessica screamed, not in pain but in pure, unfiltered rage. "You don't deserve this!" She was shrieking now, all pretense abandoned, her beautiful face twisted into something ugly and hateful. "You're nothing! Your mother was weak, your father was pathetic, and you should have died screaming in that fire like the worthless nobody you are." The words should have hurt. They were meant to hurt, meant to reduce Emily back to the servant girl who believed she deserved cruelty, who accepted abuse as her natural state. But standing here now, in a gown of silver and moonlight, wearing her mother's necklace, surrounded by witnesses who had seen Jessica's true nature exposed, Emily felt nothing but pity. She stepped forward around Gregory's protective bulk and looked down at Jessica with perfect clarity. When she spoke, her voice carried through the silent hall, strong and certain and absolutely unshakable. "I deserved love," Emily said. "I deserved family. I deserved kindness, and I refuse to let your poison make me believe I didn't." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Jessica seemed stunned, as though she couldn't comprehend that the girl she had spent 15 years breaking had somehow found the strength to stand whole. Then the moment shattered as guards swarmed forward, dragging Jessica away from Emily, from Gregory, from the silver blade that still lay gleaming on the floor. Jessica fought them, her composure completely destroyed, screaming accusations and justifications and threats that made no coherent sense. Emily watched her go and felt something shift in her chest. Not victory, exactly, but closure. The woman who had haunted her nightmares, who had defined her worth, who had controlled her entire existence, that woman had no power anymore. Whatever Jessica had been, whatever fear she had inspired, it was finished now. If you're feeling the weight of this moment, if Emily's strength just hit you in the chest, then you understand what this story is really about. This isn't just about fantasy and wolves and magic. This is about surviving people who try to convince you you're worthless. This is about finding your voice when someone spent years silencing it. This is about refusing to let cruelty define who you are. Stay for the final chapter, because justice is about to be served in a way that will leave you breathless. And if this story is speaking to something in you, share it. Someone else needs to hear that they're not nothing, that they deserved better, that they're exactly who they're meant to be. Gregory shifted back to human form, his expression carved from stone, as he surveyed the hall full of shocked witnesses. When he spoke, his voice carried ancient authority, the weight of every alpha who had ever passed judgment under the moon goddess's gaze. By pack law, by Luna's decree, by the old ways, I invoke blood trial. The words sent a ripple of recognition through the assembled wolves. Blood trial. The ancient judgment where truth could not hide, where the Alpha's wolf forced confession from the guilty, where justice was witnessed by all and mercy was extended only to those who deserved it. "Bring forward Damien Pierce," Gregory commanded, and guards obeyed instantly, dragging the court advisor from wherever he had been confined. Damien looked terrified, his face pale, his hands shaking as he was forced to kneel beside Jessica in the center of the hall. "You both stand accused of conspiracy, murder, fraud, and attempted regicide," Gregory announced. "Under the old laws, these crimes carry sentences of death. But blood trial offers something execution does not: truth, witnessed, undeniable, spoken by your own mouths and confirmed by the Alpha's judgment." He gestured, and wolves began moving with practiced efficiency, transforming the feast hall into something older, something sacred and terrible. Tables were pushed back to create a massive circle in the center of the space. Pack members formed concentric rings around it, their bodies creating a living witness to what was about to occur. Torches were lit despite the candles, their flames casting dancing shadows that made the wolf tapestries seem to move, seem to watch with intelligent eyes. This was justice from before courts and lawyers existed, from when the pack was law and the Alpha's word was absolute. This was judgment as the moon goddess had ordained it, pure and brutal and impossible to deny. Emily found herself led to a throne that had been brought from storage, ancient wood carved with wolves and moons, positioned at the edge of the judgment circle. This was her place as Luna, as witness and victim both. Pack law required the mate to see justice done, required her presence to sanctify the judgment that would be passed. She sat, Gregory's hand squeezing hers once before he moved toward the circle's center, and watched as the hall finished its transformation. Jessica and Damien knelt in the middle of it all, surrounded by torchlight and witness rings and the weight of traditions older than the kingdom itself. The full moon hung visible through the hall's high windows, reaching its peak, and the torches around the judgment circle blazed brighter in response to celestial power. Gregory stood at the circle's edge and began to shift. But this wasn't the protective shift Emily had seen before, the rapid transformation meant to intercept an attack. This was different, slower, more intentional. This was the Alpha King revealing his true form, the wolf nature that carried the moon goddess's blessing and the authority to pass judgment in her name. Gregory's body expanded, grew larger than any wolf Emily had ever seen, larger than should have been physically possible. His fur was midnight black, but his eyes glowed with silver fire that seemed to pierce straight through to the soul. Power radiated from him in waves that made the torches flicker, that made every wolf in the hall drop to one knee in instinctive submission, that carried the weight of divinity channeled through flesh. This was the Alpha King's true form. This was judgment incarnate. Jessica and Damien knelt in the circle's center, and even their defiance crumbled in the face of what approached them. Damien was already crying, his face buried in his hands. Jessica stared up at the massive wolf with something between terror and rage, her jaw set stubbornly, even as her body betrayed her with trembling. Emily watched from her Luna's throne, knowing that truth, however long suppressed, was about to break free, and this time, nothing could stop it. The Alpha King's wolf circled the judgment ring with measured steps, each paw print deliberate, each movement carrying weight that made the air itself feel heavier. Gregory's true form towered over the kneeling prisoners, his midnight fur seeming to absorb light, while his silver eyes blazed with power that was both divine and terrifying. This was judgment, ancient, absolute, witnessed by the moon goddess herself. Damien broke first. The court advisor hadn't even tried to maintain composure once Gregory's wolf form approached him. He collapsed forward, his forehead pressing against the cold stone, his entire body shaking with sobs that carried 15 years of accumulated guilt. "I'll tell you everything," Damien's voice was high with panic, words tumbling over each other in desperate confession. "The records, I falsified them all. The death certificate, the property transfers, the guardianship papers. Jessica paid me, promised me land, promised me wealth if I helped her hide what she'd done." Gregory's wolf stopped directly in front of him, those terrible silver eyes boring into Damien's soul. The supernatural pressure intensified, and Damien's words came faster, pulled from him by power he couldn't resist. The embezzlement, 150,000 gold pieces over 15 years. Jessica collected the royal orphan stipends while Emily scrubbed floors. We used it for bribes, for gambling debts, for buying the silence of anyone who might question the story. He was gasping now, struggling to breathe under the weight of truth being forced from his lungs. The accident. It was planned for 2 days from now. A carriage with weakened wheels, a driver paid to take a corner too fast. Emily would have died, and we would have split the Johnson estates and claimed the Northern Territories through legal manipulation. The hall was silent except for Damien's confession, every wolf listening with horror as the conspiracy's full scope was laid bare. But Gregory's wolf growled, low and questioning, as though sensing there was more, something deeper, something Damien hadn't yet revealed. "She's done this before!" The words exploded from Damien like poison finally lanced from a wound. "Jessica has done this before. 3 previous husbands, all wealthy, all dead within 2 years of marriage, all their wealth transferred to her before mysterious illnesses or accidents claimed them." Gasps rippled through the witness rings. This wasn't just conspiracy. This was a pattern. A predator who had been hunting for decades, leaving a trail of bodies and stolen fortunes across multiple territories. "She targeted Lord Marcus specifically," Damien continued, the words spilling out in a rush now that the dam had broken. "Not for his wealth, for Emily, for the royal ward in his care. She wanted the Johnson estates, yes, but her real goal was always the Northern Territories. If Emily died as Marcus's heir, Jessica could claim guardianship rights and petition for territorial control. It was always about the land, about power. Marcus and Emily were just obstacles to be removed." Gregory's alpha form stared down at Damien for one long moment, judgment rendered in silence more terrifying than any spoken sentence. Then he shifted his attention away, dismissing the court advisor as beneath further notice, and spoke with a voice that existed somewhere between human speech and wolf communication, understandable to all who heard it. "Damien Pierce, for conspiracy and theft, you are exiled. Your rank is stripped. Your name is stricken from all records. You have 1 hour to leave my kingdom. If you are found within our borders after dawn, the sentence is death." Guards moved forward immediately, hauling Damien to his feet and dragging him toward the doors. His sobs echoed through the hall as he was removed from the only home he had ever known, his entire life reduced to whatever he could carry in the next 60 minutes. Then Gregory's wolf turned to Jessica. She knelt alone in the judgment circle now, and even she, who had maintained cold composure through murder and conspiracy and attempted assassination, looked shaken. But she lifted her chin, met those blazing silver eyes, and tried one final manipulation. "I did it for the pack," Jessica said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I did it to protect the bloodlines from weakness, to ensure strong leadership, to—" Gregory's alpha command cut through her lies like a blade through silk. "Speak only what is real." The power in those words was absolute. It crashed over Jessica like a physical wave, and Emily watched her stepmother's body go rigid as though every muscle had locked simultaneously. Jessica's mouth opened, and the truth poured out in her own voice, unstoppable, undeniable, witnessed by hundreds of wolves who would carry this testimony to every corner of the kingdom. "I killed Marcus because he was weak," Jessica said, and the words were clearly not ones she chose to speak. her face contorted with rage at her own betrayal, but her mouth kept moving. He didn't deserve his lands or his title. He was going to update Emily's trust, going to protect her inheritance, and I couldn't allow that. The poison was easy, slow. He died thinking it was illness, never knowing his wife had murdered him for property deeds and gold. The confession continued, relentless, each crime detailed in Jessica's own voice while she struggled uselessly against the Alpha's command. I burned the manor 6 months later, chose a servant girl who looked like Emily. Brown hair, similar age. I broke her neck first so she wouldn't scream when the fire took her. Then I locked Emily in her room and told her she was no one, that she would always be no one. Jessica's voice cracked, but whether from emotion or from fighting the compulsion, Emily couldn't tell. I watched her through the door crack, watched her terror, and I felt nothing but satisfaction that my plan was working. Emily's hands gripped the arms of her throne, her knuckles white, as she listened to 15 years of calculated cruelty laid bare in the woman's own words. Every day I gave her wolfsbane tea. Every day I made sure she knew she was worthless. Every beating, every insult, every moment of degradation. I did it deliberately. I needed her to believe she was nothing so she would never question, never remember, never become a threat to my control of the Johnson estates. The words kept coming. Truth forced out by power Jessica couldn't fight. The carriage accident was planned for 3 days from now. The driver was paid. The route was set. Emily would have died on her 20th birthday, and I would have finally claimed everything I'd worked 15 years to steal. The hall was utterly silent except for Jessica's forced confession. Even wolves who had doubted Emily's accusations, who had wondered if perhaps the servant girl was exaggerating or mistaken, now heard the truth in the perpetrator's own voice. Gregory's wolf watched Jessica with eyes that saw through to her soul, that weighed every crime and found them all wanting. When the confession finally stopped, when Jessica knelt gasping and broken in the judgment circle's center, he shifted. The transformation back to human form was slower than the shift into it, deliberate and ceremonial. Gregory stood before Jessica in his ceremonial armor, an alpha king passing judgment as countless generations had before him, and his voice carried the weight of every ancestor who had ever served justice. Under the moon goddess's gaze, Jessica, the nameless, you are stripped of all titles, lands, and wealth. Your name is stricken from the noble registries. Your property is forfeit to the crown. He paused, letting the first part of the sentence sink in before delivering the second. You will serve this pack as lowest omega for the remainder of your life. You will clean the floors you once walked upon. You will serve the people you once commanded. You will experience every indignity you inflicted on Emily Johnson, every day, forever. Jessica's eyes widened with true horror as she understood the sentence. Not death, not the mercy of a quick execution, but life as the very thing she had made Emily believe she was. Nothing. Death would be mercy, Gregory said quietly. You don't deserve mercy. Jessica's scream of rage and despair echoed through the great hall as guards seized her, dragging her toward the servants' quarters where she would spend the rest of her days experiencing the cruelty she had inflicted. The sound cut off abruptly as doors closed behind her, and the hall was left in solemn silence. Pack members stood frozen, processing the evil they had witnessed, the justice they had seen served. Some looked shaken, others satisfied, but all of them understood that what had happened here tonight would be remembered for generations, a warning that cruelty would be answered, that truth could not stay buried forever, that justice existed even when it seemed impossibly delayed. Gregory crossed to Emily's throne, his steps measured, and she saw in his eyes that he understood exactly what she was feeling, not triumph, not satisfaction, just grief, finally acknowledged and witnessed and released. Emily stood, and the tears came. Not weak tears or ashamed tears, but the tears of someone who had survived hell and finally reached the other side. Gregory's arms came around her, holding her while she cried for her murdered father and lost mother, for the childhood stolen and the years spent believing she deserved cruelty. "You survived her darkness," Gregory said quietly against her hair. "Now you'll shine in the light you were always meant to have." One by one, pack members approached to bow before their true Luna. Not the servant girl who had scrubbed their floors, but the woman who had survived systematic destruction and emerged stronger for it. Emily accepted their allegiance with grace she was still learning, with strength that had been forged in fire and tempered by survival. The coronation began immediately. No more delays, no more stolen time. The crown that settled onto Emily's head was silver and moonstone, ancient and beautiful, and it felt right in a way nothing else ever had. As Luna Queen, Emily's first royal decree was spoken clearly, her voice carrying through the hall to every witness. Effective immediately, all noble wards and orphans will be subject to quarterly inspections by crown-appointed guardians. Any suspicious deaths will trigger immediate investigation. Servants are granted rights of appeal and protection under royal law. No one will be treated as property. No one will be told they are nothing. Through the great hall's windows, visible in the courtyard below, Jessica was on her knees with a scrub brush, cleaning stone steps under the watchful eyes of guards. Her beauty was already fading, her perfect composure destroyed, her future reduced to the very labor she had once inflicted. Emily turned away from the window and faced her pack, her people, her kingdom. "I learned that cruelty returns to its source," she said. "That truth can be suppressed, but never destroyed, and that the love we deserve will always find us, even when we've been taught we're not worthy of it." The words hung in the air like a blessing, like a promise, like hope offered to anyone who had ever been told they were less than they were. 6 months later, Emily stood in the Northern Territories, her mother's. Homeland finally returned to its rightful heir. The land stretched before her, beautiful and wild and hers to govern with wisdom, earned through suffering and compassion forged in survival. Gregory stood at her side, their mate bond visible in the way they moved together, the way they ruled together, the way they had built a kingdom on truth instead of lies. Far away in the capital, Jessica scrubbed floors and emptied chamber pots, her hands raw and bleeding, her beauty faded under harsh labor, her future an endless repetition of the cruelty she had once inflicted. She would live long years as the lowest omega, experiencing every day the casual disregard she had taught Emily to accept as her due. And Emily? Emily finally understood what her mother's necklace had always meant. She was never defined by Jessica's cruelty. She was defined by her own resilience, her own choice to heal, her own refusal to let darkness steal her light. She was, and had always been, exactly enough.
So that's Emily's story, from servant to Luna Queen, from believing she was worthless to understanding she was always valuable. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt like Emily or known someone who needed to hear they deserved better, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing from people all over the world who connect with these stories. And hey, if you made it this far, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Turn on notifications too, because trust me, what's coming next is just as powerful. Thanks for being here. Until next time.